The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as 10-year-old Prince George walked quietly through the corridors. His small footsteps echoed softly against the grand walls adorned with centuries-old paintings and golden frames. The young prince had always been curious about the people who worked tirelessly to keep the palace running, but today something felt different. As he rounded the corner near the East Wing, George noticed an unusual stillness. The normally bustling hallway seemed eerily quiet. His governess had mentioned they would be taking a different route to his morning lessons, but she hadn't explained why. George's natural curiosity got the better of him as he heard soft sobbing coming from behind a partially open door. Peering through the crack, he saw Mrs. Margaret Whitfield, one of the palace's longest-serving housekeepers, sitting on a simple wooden chair. Her usually pristine uniform was wrinkled, and her hands trembled as she held a crumpled letter. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks as she stared at the official-looking document. George had known Mrs. Whitfield since he was very small. She was the kind woman who always had a warm smile and would sometimes slip him an extra biscuit when his parents weren't looking. Seeing her in such distress made his young heart ache with concern. "Mrs. Whitfield?" George called softly as he gently pushed the door open wider. The elderly woman quickly wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself. "Your Royal Highness," she said, attempting to stand and curtsy despite her obvious emotional state. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know you would be passing by." "Please don't get up," George said with a maturity that surprised even himself. "Are you all right? You look very sad." Mrs. Whitfield's lower lip quivered as she looked at the young prince. She had served the royal family for over 40 years, watching George grow from a baby into the thoughtful young boy standing before her. The kindness in his eyes reminded her so much of his father. "I've just received some difficult news, Your Highness," she said carefully, not wanting to burden him with adult problems. "It's nothing for you to worry about." But George stepped closer, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Sometimes talking about sad things makes them feel a little better. My grandmother taught me that." The sincerity in his voice broke down Mrs. Whitfield's reserve. "It's my grandson, Tommy," she whispered. "He's been very ill, and the doctors say—" She paused, unable to finish the sentence. George had heard the adults talking in hushed tones about serious illnesses before. He understood that sometimes people got sick in ways that medicine couldn't always fix. His young mind processed this information with the wisdom of someone who had been raised around both privilege and responsibility. "How old is Tommy?" George asked, settling into a nearby chair so he could be at her eye level. "He's 8, Your Highness. Just 2 years younger than you. He loves football and drawing, and he's always asking about what it's like to live in a palace." Mrs. Whitfield managed a small smile through her tears. "I tell him stories about the grand rooms and the beautiful gardens." George's mind began working quickly. He thought about his own life, filled with opportunities and experiences that most children could only dream about. He thought about Tommy, a boy not much younger than himself, fighting a battle that seemed impossibly unfair. "Where does Tommy live?" George inquired. "In a small flat in East London, Your Highness. The hospital bills have been very expensive, and my daughter has been struggling to manage everything while caring for Tommy." The young prince sat quietly for a moment, absorbing this information. He had always been taught about the importance of service and helping others, but this felt different. This wasn't about attending a charity function or cutting a ribbon at a new building. This was about a real person, someone connected to his daily life at the palace, facing a genuine crisis. "Mrs. Whitfield," George said slowly, "would Tommy like to visit the palace?" The housekeeper's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, Your Highness, that's very kind of you to think of, but I couldn't possibly ask for such a thing. Tommy is quite weak from his treatments, and I'm sure the security requirements would be too complicated." But George's mind was already racing with possibilities. He had seen how his parents and grandparents used their position to bring joy to others, especially children facing difficult circumstances. He remembered the happiness on children's faces when they visited the palace for special events. It wouldn't be complicated, George said, with the confidence of someone who had grown up understanding how the palace operated. People visit all the time, and if Tommy is too weak to come here, maybe we could find another way to help. Mrs. Brady Whitfield looked at the young prince with amazement. Here was a child who could have anything he wanted, yet he was focused entirely on helping someone else. She had watched him grow up, but this moment revealed a depth of character that touched her heart profoundly. "Your Highness, you have such a kind heart," she said. "But I couldn't ask you or your family to go to any trouble for us." "You're not asking," George replied simply. "I'm offering. Mrs. Whitfield, you've been taking care of our family for so long. You make sure everything is perfect for us every day. It seems like now it's time for us to take care of you and your family." The wisdom in his words, coming from someone so young, left Mrs. Whitfield speechless. She had dedicated her life to serving the royal family, never expecting anything beyond her modest salary and the honor of her position. The idea that Prince George would want to help her personally seemed almost too wonderful to believe. "I need to think about this properly," George continued, standing up with newfound determination. "Can you tell me more about what Tommy needs? What would make him happy?" Mrs. Whitfield hesitated, still overwhelmed by the prince's offer. "He dreams of meeting a real prince," she admitted quietly. "He asked me to tell him stories about you and Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis. He has a picture of your family on his bedside table that he cut out from a magazine." George felt a strange sensation in his chest, a mixture of humility and responsibility that he had never experienced before. The thought that a sick little boy found comfort in looking at his picture made him realize how his position could be used for something truly meaningful. "Then we'll make sure Tommy meets a real prince," George declared. "And not just for a few minutes. We'll give him a day he'll never forget." As the words left his mouth, George felt a new understanding of what it meant to be royal. It wasn't just about living in a palace or attending ceremonies. It was about using every advantage he had been given to make life better for others, especially those who needed help the most. Mrs. Whitfield wiped her eyes again, but this time her tears were mixed with hope and gratitude. "Your Royal Highness, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," George replied with a slight smile. "Let me talk to my parents first. But Mrs. Whitfield, I promise you this. We're going to help Tommy, and we're going to help your daughter too. That's what families do for each other. And you're part of our palace family." The elderly housekeeper watched as the young prince walked away with purposeful steps. She had served the royal family through many changes and challenges, but she had never witnessed anything quite like what had just occurred. Prince George had shown her a glimpse of the kind of leader he might become one day, someone who truly understood that privilege came with the responsibility to serve others. As George made his way to find his parents, his mind was already forming plans. He thought about the palace's resources, the connections his family had, and all the ways they might be able to help not just Tommy, but other children in similar situations. This wouldn't be just about one kind gesture. It would be about starting something bigger, something that could make a real difference in people's lives. The hallway that had seemed so quiet earlier now hummed with possibility and purpose as the young prince walked toward what he knew would be one of the most important conversations of his young life. Prince William was reviewing security briefings in his private study when George knocked on the heavy oak door. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting a warm glow across the leather-bound books and family photographs that lined the walls. Catherine sat nearby, responding to correspondence about her early childhood development work. "Come in," William called, looking up to see his eldest son enter with an expression of unusual seriousness. "Papa, Mama, I need to speak with you about something important," George announced, his voice carrying a gravity that caught both parents' attention immediately. Catherine set down her pen and turned to face her son fully. "Of course, darling. What's on your mind?" George took a deep breath and began recounting his encounter with Mrs. Whitfield. He spoke carefully, ensuring he captured every detail about Tommy's illness, the family's financial struggles, and the elderly housekeeper's distress. His parents listened intently, exchanging glances that conveyed both pride in their son's compassion and concern for the situation he had described. "I want to help them," George concluded. "Not just with a visit or a small gift, but really help. Mrs. Whitfield has taken care of us for my entire life. Now we should take care of her and Tommy." William leaned back in his chair, studying his son's determined expression. He recognized the look. It was the same expression he had worn as a young man when he had decided to train as a search and rescue pilot, driven by a desire to serve others in meaningful ways. "George, what you're suggesting shows tremendous heart," William said slowly. "But helping people effectively requires careful planning. We can't simply throw resources at a problem and hope for the best." "I know that, Papa," George replied. "That's why I came to you and Mama. I need your help to do this properly." Catherine reached for her son's hand. "Tell us what you're thinking, George. What does really helping look like to you?" George had spent the entire walk to his father's study thinking about this question. "Tommy needs the best medical care, but his family can't afford it. Mrs. Whitfield is worried about keeping her job if she needs to take time off to help with Tommy. And there are probably other children like Tommy whose families work here or in other royal properties." The room fell silent as William and Catherine processed their 10-year-old son's remarkably mature assessment of the situation. They had always known George was thoughtful, but his grasp of both the immediate problem and its broader implications impressed them profoundly. "You're absolutely right about Mrs. Whitfield's concerns," William acknowledged. "Palace staff often worry about job security when family emergencies arise, even though we've always tried to be supportive." "Maybe we're not being supportive enough," George suggested quietly. "Maybe we need to do more to show people that we really do care about them, not just their work." Catherine felt tears pricking her eyes. Her son's words reminded her of Diana, his paternal grandmother, whose legacy of compassion and direct action to help others had shaped so many lives. "What specifically are you proposing, George?" Catherine asked. George straightened his shoulders, ready to present the plan he had been formulating. "First, we should arrange for Tommy to get the best medical treatment available, and we should pay for it. Second, Mrs. Whitfield should have paid leave to be with her family without worrying about her job. Third, Tommy should get to experience the palace properly. Not just a quick tour, but really see what it's like to live here." William nodded thoughtfully. "Those are all reasonable immediate steps. But you mentioned other children in similar situations. What are you thinking there?" "We could create a special fund," George explained, his excitement growing as he shared his vision. "For palace staff and their families when they face medical emergencies or other serious problems. And maybe we could have regular visits for sick children, not just special occasions." The parents exchanged another look, this one filled with amazement at their son's comprehensive thinking. George wasn't just responding emotionally to one situation. He was proposing systemic changes that could benefit many people over time. "George," William said carefully, "what you're suggesting would require significant resources and ongoing commitment. It would also need approval from grandmother and grandfather, and coordination with several government departments." "I know it's complicated, Papa," George replied. "But isn't that what we're supposed to do? Use our position to help people?" Catherine stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the palace gardens where tourists gathered daily, hoping for a glimpse of the royal family. She thought about the immense privilege their family enjoyed and the responsibility that came with it. "George is right, William," she said finally. "We have the resources and the platform to make a real difference in people's lives. Maybe it's time we use them more directly." William joined his wife at the window, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. He thought about his own childhood, the lessons his mother had taught him about service and compassion, and the example she had set by working directly with people facing difficulties. "All right," he said, turning back to his son. "Let's do this properly. But George, if we're going to help Tommy and create something larger, you need to be involved in every step. This can't just be something we do for you, it needs to be something we do with you." George's face lit up with joy and determination. "I want to be involved, Papa. I want to learn how to help people the right way." Over the next hour, the family worked together to outline a comprehensive plan. They would immediately arrange for Tommy to see a specialist at Great Ormond Street Hospital, with all expenses covered by a discretionary royal fund. Mrs. Whitfield would receive paid family leave for as long as needed. Tommy would be invited to spend a full day at the palace, with George as his personal guide. But they also planned something larger: the establishment of the Palace Staff Family Support Initiative, which would provide emergency assistance to employees facing medical crises, educational support for their children, and regular programs to strengthen the palace community. "We should visit Tommy at home first," George suggested. "Before bringing him here, I want to meet him in his own space where he feels comfortable." Catherine smiled at her son's sensitivity. "That's very thoughtful, George. It shows respect for Tommy and his family." William picked up his phone to begin making calls. "I'll contact the hospital to arrange for Dr. Matthews to see Tommy this week. He's one of the country's leading pediatric specialists." As his parents began organizing the practical details, George felt a profound sense of purpose settling over him. This was different from cutting ribbons or attending ceremonial events. This was about using his position to solve real problems and improve actual lives. "Mama," George said as Catherine prepared to contact Mrs. Whitfield's supervisor, "when we visit Tommy, could we bring Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis too? I think Tommy would like to meet all of us." "That's a wonderful idea," Catherine agreed, "as long as Tommy feels up to it." The planning continued into the evening, with each detail carefully considered to ensure Tommy's comfort and dignity. They arranged for a private car to transport the family to medical appointments, organized for groceries to be delivered to Tommy's home, and planned a gradual introduction to palace life that wouldn't overwhelm a sick child. As George prepared for bed that night, he reflected on how much his understanding of royal duty had evolved in just one day. He had always known he would one day have responsibilities as a future king, but now he understood that those responsibilities began immediately, with every opportunity he had to help others. The last thing George did before falling asleep was write a letter to Tommy, introducing himself and expressing excitement about their upcoming meeting. He wrote in simple language that an 8-year-old would understand, sharing some of his own favorite things and asking about Tommy's interests. In Mrs. Whitfield's small flat across London, she was having her own conversation with her daughter Sarah about the incredible developments of the day. Tommy lay sleeping in the next room, unaware that his life was about to change in ways no one could have imagined when the morning began. 3 weeks later, the black Range Rover pulled up quietly outside a modest brick building in East London. Prince William, Catherine, and their 3 children stepped out onto the narrow sidewalk, drawing curious glances from neighbors who couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. George carried a carefully wrapped package containing a football signed by England's national team, while Charlotte held a handmade Get Well card decorated with drawings of the palace. Mrs. Whitfield met them at the building entrance, her face glowing with a mixture of pride and nervousness. Your Royal Highnesses, welcome to our home. Tommy has been so excited since he received Prince George's letter. The family climbed 2 flights of stairs to reach the small flat where Tommy and his mother Sarah waited. Despite his ongoing medical treatment, Tommy had insisted on getting dressed in his best clothes and combing his hair carefully. He stood by the window, pale but alert, watching for the royal car's arrival. When George entered the sitting room, Tommy's eyes widened with amazement. Here was the prince from the magazine photograph, standing in his own home, looking just like a normal boy his age despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Hello, Tommy," George said, approaching slowly so as not to overwhelm the younger boy. "I'm George. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Tommy managed a shy smile. "Are you really a prince?" "I really am," George confirmed with a grin. "But I'm also just a boy who likes football and video games, just like you." The ice broke immediately as the 2 boys discovered their shared love of Chelsea Football Club. George presented the signed football, and Tommy's face lit up with pure joy as he examined each signature carefully. Charlotte showed him her card, which featured a drawing of Tommy and George playing football in the palace gardens. Prince Louis, not to be outdone by his siblings, offered Tommy his favorite toy car, explaining seriously that it was very fast and makes good noises. As the children played together on the small carpet, the adults talked quietly in the kitchen. Sarah, Tommy's mother, wiped away tears as she thanked William and Catherine for their incredible kindness. "The appointment at Great Ormond Street went so well," Sarah said. "Dr. Matthews is optimistic about Tommy's treatment plan. I can't believe how different everything feels now, knowing we have hope and support." Catherine took Sarah's hand. "You're an amazing mother, Sarah. What you've been going through would challenge anyone. We're just glad we can help." Mrs. Whitfield bustled around making tea, still hardly believing that the royal family was sitting in her daughter's small kitchen, treating them like old friends rather than subjects. "Your Majesty," Mrs. Whitfield said to William, "I've worked at the palace for over 40 years, but I never imagined anything like this. Prince George has such a kind heart." William watched his son carefully explaining the rules of a card game to Tommy and felt immense pride. "George has taught us all something important about what it means to serve others. This visit isn't just about helping your family, though we're honored to do that. It's about George learning that real leadership means caring about individual people, not just giving speeches or attending ceremonies." After an hour of games and conversation, George made an announcement that surprised even his parents. "Tommy, would you like to be my special advisor on the new children's program we're starting at the palace?" Tommy looked confused. "What do you mean?" "We're creating something called the Young Friends of the Palace," George explained, the idea having formed during their play session. "It's for children who are going through difficult times, like being sick or having other problems. They'll get to visit the palace and do special activities, but I need someone to help me understand what kids really want to do there." Tommy's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I could help with that." "Excellent," George said seriously, shaking Tommy's hand formally. "You're hired as my first advisor. We'll meet regularly to plan activities." Catherine and William exchanged glances, realizing their son had just created another layer to their charitable initiative, one that would give Tommy a sense of purpose and belonging that went far beyond receiving help. The visit concluded with plans for Tommy to visit the palace the following week, once Dr. Matthews had cleared him for increased activity. As the royal family prepared to leave, Tommy hugged each of them goodbye, holding on to George the longest. "Thank you for coming to see me," Tommy whispered. "I was scared before, but now I feel brave." "You were always brave, Tommy," George replied. "Sometimes we just need friends to remind us." The drive back to the palace was quiet, each family member processing the emotional impact of the afternoon. George stared out the window, thinking about the difference between Tommy's small flat and the palace's vast rooms. The contrast made him more determined than ever to use his privilege responsibly. 1 week later, Tommy arrived at Buckingham Palace for his special day. George had planned every detail personally, from a private tour of normally off-limits rooms to a football match in the palace gardens with the other royal children. Tommy met the palace horses, had tea in the same room where world leaders dined, and even tried on a miniature version of a guard's ceremonial hat. But the most meaningful moment came when George showed Tommy the new office being prepared for the Young Friends of the Palace program. Charts on the walls displayed plans for monthly visits, special events, and support services for children facing various challenges. "This is all because of you, Tommy," George said. "You helped me understand what we needed to do." Tommy studied the charts seriously, offering suggestions about activities other children might enjoy. His insights proved valuable, leading to modifications that made the program more child-centered and engaging. By the end of the day, as Tommy prepared to return home, he had transformed from a frightened sick boy into a confident young advisor with an important job. The palace staff had watched in amazement as Prince George demonstrated leadership skills that went far beyond his years, treating Tommy as an equal partner rather than a charity case. The most remarkable moment came during Tommy's departure. As the family walked toward the palace entrance, they passed the changing of the guard ceremony. The tourists and crowd were watching the traditional display when something unexpected happened. One of the guards, seeing Prince George approaching with Tommy, broke from the usual protocol in a subtle but meaningful way. He offered Tommy a small, respectful nod of recognition. Then another guard did the same. Word had spread throughout the palace staff about Prince George's initiative and Tommy's special role as advisor. As more staff members acknowledged Tommy's presence, gardeners tipping their hats, housekeepers offering warm smiles, the crowd began to notice. Tourists started whispering among themselves, wondering who this special young visitor was that had earned such respectful attention from the palace staff. The symbolism was not lost on the royal family. Here was a working-class boy from East London, seriously ill but full of courage, being honored by some of Britain's most traditional institutions. It represented everything the monarchy could be at its best, a bridge between different worlds, a force for bringing people together rather than keeping them apart. As Tommy's car pulled away from the palace, he waved from the window while clutching the photo he had taken with the entire royal family. But more importantly, he carried with him a newfound sense of confidence and purpose that would aid his recovery in ways no medicine could provide. The palace fell into a different kind of quiet that evening, not the silence of routine, but the contemplative stillness that follows meaningful change. Staff members who had witnessed the day's events found themselves reflecting on their own roles and the impact their work could have on individual lives. Prince George spent the evening writing in a new journal his father had given him, documenting not just the day's events, but his thoughts about leadership, friendship, and responsibility. The 10-year-old prince was beginning to understand that his future role would be defined not by the crown he might one day wear, but by the connections he made with people and the positive changes he could inspire. Mrs. Whitfield returned to her duties the next day with renewed pride in her workplace, knowing that the palace truly cared about its extended family. Tommy continued his medical treatment with improved spirits and regular visits to advise on the Young Friends program, which grew to serve dozens of children within its first year. The guard who had first acknowledged Tommy became something of a legend among the palace staff, representing the moment when the institution's formal traditions bent to accommodate human compassion. His simple nod of respect had said more about the monarchy's values than any official proclamation could have achieved. Years later, when Prince George reflected on the lessons that shaped his understanding of royal duty, he would always return to those moments with Tommy. The afternoon in a small East London flat, the day at the palace, and especially that moment when the guard showed respect for a sick little boy. It had taught him that true leadership means seeing the humanity in every person and using whatever power you have to honor that humanity. The story became part of palace folklore, passed down among staff members as an example of what the royal family could accomplish when they focused on individual relationships rather than institutional formalities. It reminded everyone that behind the grandeur and protocol, the monarchy's real purpose was to serve people, one person at a time, with genuine care and respect.